I tried out the Sony 85mm G Master Mark I a long time ago, and after all my tests, I ended up passing on this lens, mainly because I use autofocus lenses for video, and I ran into tons of problems with the original G Master. However, I was really excited when the G Master Mark II came out. Let's put these two lenses to the test. First up, here are some spec tables for these two lenses. You can pause if you'd like to read more, but the specs that I was interested in was the price, the size, the weight, and the autofocus motors. For the price, the original G Master is now $1,300, while the GM2 is $1,800. There is a $500 difference between these two lenses. If you're just looking at spec tables and you don't have these two lenses in hand, it could be very difficult to tell the difference, so let's try to expand on that. Both of these lenses have the same materials. However, the G Master Mark II has an iris lock and an extra custom button, if that means anything to you. They both have 77mm front threads, and they both have declickable aperture rings, which is really handy for video. The big difference here is size and weight. The GM1 weighs 1.8 pounds, the GM2 weighs 1.4 pounds, and for everyone else, I'll also put the metric system on screen now. The GM2 is about a ½ inch smaller in diameter than the original G Master, even though they're both 77mm front threads. Another interesting thing when I was testing these two lenses is they're both 85mm lenses, but they are just a little bit different in the frame. They're both advertised at having a 29 angle of view. I'm not sure how to measure this or say this scientifically, but the GM2 is slightly wider than the GM1. While we're on this dirty grid mat, it also is worth noting that they both handle distortion very well. Before we jump into the autofocus test, I want to thank today's video sponsor, Artlist. Artlist has a new tools section where you can get direct access to the Artlist catalog, AI assistant, and over 50 plugins directly from your video editor. The Artlist library extension for Premiere Pro allows you to stay within Premiere Pro and search for music and sound effects. You're able to use filters like mood, video theme, and genre to find the songs that you're looking for. You can also select BPM and if you want vocal or instrumental tracks. AI voiceovers are also available within Premiere Pro's Artlist library as well. Add your text, choose the voiceover style, generate, and then drag and drop the voiceover directly into your timeline. The AI assistant in Premiere Pro can also analyze your footage and place auto zooms as well. As a test, I uploaded a 7-minute clip where we only got one good take, and for this test clip, it found the good take and placed a zoom in the middle of the outro. If you'd like to check this out, Artlist is offering 2 free months if you use the link in my description. Anyone with a Music and Sound Effects Pro subscription can get the Music and Sound Effects Library extension. If you have an AI voiceover subscription, you can use the Voice Catalog Library extension. Artlist Max subscribers get all of these tools as part of their plan. Artlist has over 700,000 assets including music, footage, sound effects, voiceovers, templates, LUTs, and more. So you'll be sure to find exactly what you're looking for. Thank you, Artlist, for sponsoring this video. On to the major reason I passed on the original 85mm G Master. When I tested this lens out the first time, the autofocus had a lot of strange quirks, but now that the GM2 is out, let's run through a couple of comparisons, starting with a low light test. Looking at this footage, I was wondering why my door was so dirty. I'm suddenly not mad about my door being dirty anymore. Sony 85mm low light focus test, and this lens is strangely loud whenever you're focusing with it. I'm not sure if this is translating to the camera, but there's definitely an audible noise whenever I'm focusing back and forth. As far as autofocus goes, it looks like it's doing a pretty good job. Sometimes it does look right there. It focuses and then it jumps. The matte box looks like it's almost in focus, like that tilde right there, but it's not quite. So let's go back to the doorknob and go here, and it was able to lock on there. But sometimes, like right there, it just jumps a little ahead. So it makes it really difficult to recommend the original 85mm G Master lens whenever it's really kind of struggles in low light, or just general autofocus. In these situations right here, like it's fine there. But right there, it just focuses a little in front. 85mm G Master Mark II. Let's see how this does. Focus is very quick, and on the 40, it doesn't look like it's doing that like jump ahead focusing or back focusing. I think photographers call it back focusing, but it seems like it's locking on and staying there. So overall, the G Master Mark II is a big improvement over the G Master Mark I. The noise and accuracy probably has something to do with the different motor types in these two lenses. The original G Master uses a linear supersonic wave motor, which sounds pretty impressive, but in practice, it just wasn't that good for video. And it was okay for photo. But the GM2's XD linear motors are superb. I'm not a professional portrait photographer, but I did a test with my wife with the GM1 and 2, and just having her turn around and see how the autofocus handles face and eye detect. These were shot with my A7R4 with wide focus mode and face detection enabled. Out of 17 images, the 85mm GM1 was able to get a total of 5 photos in focus. The focus was slightly off on most of them, even if her eyes were clearly in frame and not obstructed by her hair. Found that pretty strange. The GM2 was able to get 16 of 17 images in focus, and the only one that wasn't in focus, it was almost focusing like between her eye and her hair that was sticking out, so it was like somewhere in between, while I was set to continuous autofocus, and I was just holding the shutter down as fast as it could go. So even then, I still think this performed really well, much better than the GM1. Now onto some natural light video tests. Okay, look at me, and actually turn the other way a little, like, no, 45, yes, like that. So you want your back to be to the sun. Like, you want the shady side to be to the camera. Sony 85mm G Master Mark I. Go to Mark II. This autofocus is just set to wide, so it should grab her as soon as she turns around. Yep, and come back. Tracking. There's eye detect. Mark I. Now jump back in. Now jump out. And jump back in. Perfect. Man, I don't know why I didn't think of this earlier. So the 85mm GM2, okay, marker 2. This is way better than me doing this and then changing the lens, running around. Okay, pause for a second. Ooh, great. Now come back. Now go back into frame, quickly.
Is it supposed to be comical?
No, it's an autofocus test.
Oh, do I do that again then? I thought it was being cute.
Yeah, you can do that again. Now step out. Now step back in. Beautiful. The GM1 did an alright job in proper lighting. The GM2 did a great job in all lighting conditions in photo and for video. The GM2's autofocus is better, and I actually trust it to let this lens be sharp for a talking head interview. I did exactly that on a recent shoot. I had an entire hour-long interview, and I let the 85mm just shoot on a tripod, and I did not have time to be behind the camera making sure it was in focus. I got back to the computer, and the entire interview was sharp and in focus. It's really nice to be able to trust the autofocus of the GM2. When it comes to flaring, the GM2 has more controlled flares, while the GM1 has slightly more flaring. Not a lot to compare here, in my opinion. For chromatic aberration and high contrast areas, the GM2 has some CA, but not nearly as much as the GM. The original G Master has a little bit more obvious chromatic aberration. When it comes to color cast with these two lenses, they both are pretty neutral. The GM1 slightly skewed a little warmer, the GM2 a little bit cooler, but you probably won't notice if you are not really pixel peeping and like looking at color chip charts. The only reason I ran this test was because I'm also testing the Shure 85mm and the Sony 85mm 1.8. And these two lenses are like, when you compare them, they're just all over the place. So I will have this video live at a later point, but I'm still working on this one. But going through back and forth, shooting with the two G Masters side by side and comparing them, I didn't really notice much of a difference. When it comes to bokeh, both of these lenses are pretty good in my opinion. The GM2 looks a little bit sharper, but the GM1 looks a little bit more fuzzier and organic, if that makes sense. This is being pretty critical, and I don't think you would notice a difference unless you were shooting these side by side and pixel peeping like I was. The shape is also pretty consistent with more distortion happening closer to the edges. Again, I realize this is like mostly a portrait lens for photographers, so I guess that is what a portrait photographer would be interested in. For sharpness and image quality, here are some charts I shot. You can pause this if you'd like to see each section, but the only differences I was really able to find in the GM1 to 2 is the GM1 had slightly more vignette around the edges, but by f2 it was gone. The GM2 did not have as strong as vignetting wide open, and it was also gone by f1.8. Both lenses were sharp throughout the frame, which was actually interesting because I thought the GM2 was going to be sharper, but when you have the charts and they're both manual focused and on the same plane, everything seemed to be pretty sharp. I think my illusion of the GM2 being sharper when I was out testing actually was just attributed to the autofocus motors being snappier and more accurate. If you can get the 85mm GM1 in focus, it is just as sharp in my testing as the GM2. The problem is getting it sharp with that autofocus. For minimum focusing distance, I did a quick test in the office. Sony 85mm f1.4 G Master Mark I, and I thought this was going to be pretty straightforward, but I consistently keep getting like 30.5 or 30.5/8. So this is advertised as a 31.5 inch minimum focusing distance, but I'm getting a little closer than that. Just to show you guys my settings here, I have lens breathing compensation off, and I have active steady shot off. And we're filming in 4K 24p, so there's no crop there. So I don't know if that would like affect the minimum focusing distance, but I keep getting tighter minimum focusing distance once I start actually measuring these out than what Sony and Shure are actually advertising. So very interesting. Sony 85mm GM2, again at minimum focusing distance, we're getting 30.5, just like we were with the G Master Mark II. I got 3/8 that time, but it is still a lot closer than, it's about an inch closer than the advertised minimum focusing distance. Again, I'm not sure if my A7R5 has a different setting on it or something. Clear image zoom is not enabled. Yeah, we're at 1x, so very strange how I'm about, an inch or two off on each of these 85mm lenses. Both the GM1 and 2 were slightly closer than advertised distance, but I still find it difficult to use either of these lenses for macro type shots. I love shooting macro type shots to show texture or B-roll or transitions in my shots, but both of these lenses, I ran into issues with the minimum focusing distance. This is another reason I didn't buy the GM1, and I actually went with the 90mm macro for my B-roll and macro shots. Going forward, even if I do pick up the GM2, I am still definitely keeping my 90mm macro. I need to do a video about this lens. This is like my favorite lens that I've never talked about. If you are only shooting talking heads or portraits, you probably won't run into a macro minimum focusing distance issue here. But if you are shooting macro shots, this will not give you much magnification. For stabilization, neither of these lenses have optical stabilization, so it was a pretty easy one. When it comes to focus breathing, both of these lenses have some focus breathing if you're not using the lens breathing compensation, but if you enable that, it completely removes it. I always leave that on my Sony cameras, so this isn't really something that I have to worry about. When it comes to choosing between the 85mm GM1 and GM2, this is an easy choice for me. I'm definitely going with the GM2. I use GM lenses for their autofocus, and the unreliable GM1 autofocus is what caused me to pass on this one in the first place. I got around this by using my 50mm 1.2 and my 90mm macro, but now if I can actually trust the autofocus of the GM2 lens, I can use this for my second or third interview talking head angle and be able to trust this autofocus. If the original GM had the same autofocus performance as the GM2, this would be more of a difficult decision. I guess it's lighter and smaller and has better flare and chromatic aberration control, but honestly, I don't think that is a $500 difference if autofocus was the same. However, autofocus performance is not the same, and that is definitely worth $500 to me. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, and I have another 85mm video coming out with the Sirui 1.4 and the classic Sony 85mm 1.8. Check back for that video and subscribe. If it's already out, I will just leave it on screen now. Thank you guys for sticking around to the end, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye. And out of frame. Or backwards, that's cool. You can turn around. That's a good test too.